in the small, forgotten town of Eldritch Hollow, legends whispered through the corridors of time about the Chapel of the Silent Sisters, a decrepit, abandoned structure shrouded in darkness and mystery. According to townsfolk many years ago, the chapel was a sanctuary for a reclusive order of nuns, until a tragic fire claimed the lives of all its occupants under mysterious circumstances. Since then, the chapel had stood untouched, its charred walls and shattered stained glass windows a stark reminder of the past. It was a cold evening in October when 5 daring teenagers, fueled by curiosity and a love for thrill, decided to explore the haunted chapel. Among them was Jake, the de facto leader, with his charismatic and fearless demeanor; Emily, the skeptic who enjoyed debunking myths; Lucas, the quiet one with a fascination for history; Mia, adventurous and always up for a challenge; and Zoe, whose curiosity often led her into trouble. As they approached the chapel under the cloak of twilight, the air grew colder, and an eerie silence enveloped them. The only sounds were the crunch of dried leaves under their feet and the distant howling of the wind. The chapel loomed before them, its towering silhouette casting long shadows across the ground. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Emily whispered, her voice tinged with hesitation. "We've already come this far," Jake replied with a grin. "Don't tell me you're scared." Ignoring the nervous glances from his friends, Jake pushed open the heavy wooden door of the chapel. It creaked ominously, breaking the silence like a scream in the night. The group hesitantly stepped inside, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, revealing rows of dusty pews and a cracked altar at the far end. As they ventured deeper, the air grew thick with the smell of mold and decay. Suddenly, Mia's flashlight flickered over something that made her gasp, a series of old photographs pinned to a notice board, all showing a group of nuns. In each photo, the same figure stood slightly apart from the rest, a nun with a stern face and eyes that seemed to pierce through the veil of time. "Guys, look at this," Mia called out, her voice echoing slightly in the vast emptiness. The group gathered around, studying the photographs. Zoe, feeling uneasy, peered closer at the solitary nun. "There's something off about her," Zoe murmured, her eyes narrowing. "It's like she's watching us." Shaking off the unsettling feeling, Lucas tried to lighten the mood. "Come on, it's just a photo. Let's check out the rest of this place." They continued exploring, eventually reaching the Undercroft, a dark, dank area beneath the chapel where the nuns were once buried. The air was cooler here, and the smell of earth pervaded their senses. As they walked among the ancient tombs, an oppressive silence fell upon them. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the Undercroft, extinguishing their flashlights. Panic ensued as they fumbled in the dark, the sound of their breaths loud in their ears. "Guys, stay calm." Jake's voice tried to steady them. "Just a draft. Let's relight the—" His words were cut off by a soft, haunting melody, a hymn that seemed to rise from the very walls of the chapel. The melody was beautiful, yet mournful, filled with a sorrow that chilled them to their bones. "Who's singing?" Emily whispered, terror rising in her voice. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, a figure slowly materialized among the shadows, a nun, her habit old and tattered, her face hidden beneath a veil. But it was her eyes, dark and full of malice, that froze them in place. "You should not have come here," she hissed, her voice a chilling echo of the past. The teenagers scattered, screaming, as the ghostly nun advanced. One by one, they tried to find their way back to the chapel entrance, but the layout seemed to twist and turn unnaturally. Zoe, the most curious and least afraid of the supernatural, found herself alone, her heart pounding as she heard the eerie hymn growing louder. With each step, the chilling realization dawned on her that not all of them might make it out alive. The haunted chapel held secrets darker than they had ever imagined, and the nun, the keeper of these secrets, was not about to let them leave easily. Zoe's breath came in shallow gasps as she navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the chapel. The air was thick with the scent of ancient incense and charred wood, making it hard to breathe. Every shadow seemed to twist into sinister shapes, and the soft, sorrowful hymn echoed through the halls, a spectral reminder of the chapel's tragic past. Meanwhile, Jake and Emily found themselves trapped in the main hall, the doors seemingly sealed by an invisible force. The haunting melody enveloped them, its notes weaving a tapestry of despair that seemed almost tangible. Jake, ever the protector, stood in front of Emily, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, searching for a sign of the ghostly nun. "Emily, stay behind me," Jake instructed, his voice steady despite the fear that clawed at his insides. "I don't understand, Jake. What does she want from us?" Emily's voice trembled as she clung to Jake's arm. Before Jake could reply, the soft whisper of fabric gliding over stone alerted them to the nun's presence. She appeared from the shadow, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, her gaze fixed on Emily with an intensity that sent shivers down their spines. "You bear her mark," the nun whispered, pointing a gnarled finger at Emily. "You must atone for the sins of the past." Confusion and terror gripped Emily as she glanced down at her own body, looking for any mark she was unaware of. But there was nothing there, just the faint glow of the flashlight illuminating her plain clothes. Back in the Undercroft, Lucas and Mia were desperately trying to regroup with the others. The cryptic layout of the chapel seemed to change with every turn, disorienting them further. As they turned a corner, a cold gust of wind blew past, carrying with it a soft, melancholic whisper. "Repent, repent. The end is nigh." Mia clutched Lucas's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that? Lucas, we're not alone here." Lucas, usually the calm one, swallowed hard, his mind racing for a logical explanation. "It's just the wind, Mia. Old buildings make strange sounds." But even as he spoke, he knew his words rang hollow. The chapel was alive with the echoes of its grim history, and they were not merely guests, they were intruders. In another part of the chapel, Zoe stumbled upon a small, hidden room that appeared to be untouched by time. Inside, an old diary lay open on a dusty table, the pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was elegant but frantic, revealing the thoughts and fears of Sister Agatha, the very nun who now haunted them. Zoe read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "Fire. It was no accident. We were betrayed, and now we are bound to this place, forever to roam in sorrow. We seek only release." Understanding dawned on Zoe. The nun wasn't there to harm them. She was bound to the chapel by her untimely death and the unresolved tragedies of her past. They were her only hope for peace. Armed with this new knowledge, Zoe left the room, determined to find her friends and share what she had learned. But the chapel had other plans. The corridors shifted once more, and the haunting hymn grew to a crescendo, as if warning her of the dangers of delving too deep into the chapel's secrets. As Zoe navigated the shifting passages, her resolve strengthened. She needed to find the others, to help the nun find peace, to end their nightmare. But as she turned a corner, she came face to face with the ghostly figure of Sister Agatha, her expression one of profound sorrow and rage. "You know the truth," the nun whispered, her voice echoing around the stone walls. "Will you help us, child?" Zoe nodded, her fear tempered by compassion. "Yes, I will help you, but I need to find my friends first." The nun stepped aside, allowing Zoe to pass. As Zoe hurried away, the soft hymn followed her, a spectral lullaby that seemed less threatening now that she understood its purpose. But the chapel was not done with them yet, and the secrets it held were deeper and darker than Zoe could have ever imagined. Zoe's footsteps echoed in the ancient corridors as she hurried to find her friends, the weight of Sister Agatha's sorrow and hope mingling in her heart. The chapel, sensing her newfound resolve, seemed to relent slightly, the passages becoming less convoluted, guiding her towards the main hall where Jake and Emily were trapped. As she approached, the air grew heavier, tinged with a palpable sense of urgency. The haunting hymn had faded, replaced by a deep silence that seemed to throb with anticipation. Pushing open the door, Zoe found Jake and Emily cornered by the spectral nun,
who now seemed more apparition than menace, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. "Jake! Emily!" Zoe called out, relief flooding her voice as she saw they were unharmed. Emily turned, her face pale but eyes brightening at the sight of Zoe. "Zoe, you're okay." Jake, ever vigilant, kept his gaze fixed on Sister Agatha. "Zoe, what did you find? What's happening?" Zoe quickly relayed the contents of the diary, explaining the tragic history and the restless spirits bound to the chapel. "We need to help them find peace. It's the only way we'll get out of here."
Sister Agatha's flickering form seemed to steady as Zoe spoke, her presence becoming more pronounced. "You have read the words of my heart," the nun said, her voice no longer chilling but imbued with a melancholic warmth. "Help us find the light, and you shall find your way home." Meanwhile, Lucas and Mia, still lost in the Undercroft, felt a change in the air as the oppressive atmosphere began to lift. The cryptic whispers that had haunted their steps faded, and for the first time since entering the chapel, they found a clear path leading upwards. "We have to keep moving," Lucas urged, a newfound hope kindling in his voice. "I think it's getting better." Climbing out of the Undercroft, they emerged near the main hall, surprisingly reuniting with the rest of the group. The joy of their reunion was tempered by the urgency of their task. Together, they listened as Zoe and Sister Agatha explained what they must do next. "The fire that claimed our lives was no mere accident," Sister Agatha continued, her voice echoing softly around the chamber. "It was born of betrayal and malice, a curse that binds us to these ruins. To release us, you must find the artifact that sealed our fate, the Crucifix of Shadows. It was hidden within these walls by those who wished to keep us here," the nun disclosed, her gaze intense. The teenagers exchanged wary glances, the gravity of the situation settling upon them. Armed with purpose, they agreed to split up into two groups to cover more ground. Jake and Mia headed towards the chapel's library, rumored to house ancient texts and relics, while Zoe, Lucas, and Emily explored the deeper sanctuaries, where the artifact was likely concealed. As they embarked on their respective quests, the chapel seemed to respond to their intentions, its oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly, allowing faint rays of moonlight to filter through the broken windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the stone floors. In the library, Jake and Mia sifted through old, dusty tomes and relics. After hours of searching, Mia's hand brushed against a loose stone in the wall, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in a black velvet cloth, was the Crucifix of Shadows. Its surface was intricately carved, shimmering with an unnatural darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. Meanwhile, Zoe, Lucas, and Emily encountered a series of cryptic puzzles in the deeper sanctuaries, each solution bringing them closer to their goal. The final puzzle, a massive stone door with celestial alignments, required them to align symbols in a specific sequence to reveal the chamber where the crucifix was to be placed. As both groups converged, bringing the Crucifix of Shadows to the celestial chamber, the air within the chapel stirred, a sense of anticipation building. They positioned the crucifix on the ancient altar, and as they did, a profound silence enveloped the chapel. Then, softly at first, the hymn began again, this time as a chorus of ghostly voices, lifting in a crescendo of light and shadow. The walls of the chapel seemed to breathe, releasing decades of sorrow and pain as the spirits of the nuns began to ascend, their forms glowing with a serene light. Sister Agatha appeared once more, her expression one of gratitude and peace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fading like a sigh in the wind. "You have freed us." With those final words, the spectral figures vanished, and the chapel was bathed in a gentle, warm light. The curse lifted. The teenagers, exhausted but elated, found their way back to the entrance, the chapel now just a silent monument to their bravery. As they stepped out into the cool night air, the chapel behind them quiet and still, they knew they had changed. No longer mere thrill-seekers, they had become keepers of secrets, guardians of the hidden truths that lurk in the shadows of the past. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. The teenagers emerged from the chapel, their faces weary, but illuminated by a sense of accomplishment and relief. The oppressive darkness that had once shrouded the chapel of the Silent Sisters was now lifted, replaced by a tranquil silence that spoke of final rest and peace. They walked away from the chapel, the ground beneath their feet feeling more solid, the air fresher. As they reached the edge of the woods that bordered the chapel grounds, they paused, turning to look back at the now peaceful sanctuary. "It's over, isn't it?" Mia asked, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "It seems so," Lucas replied, adjusting his glasses, his mind still trying to process the night's supernatural events. Jake placed a reassuring hand on Mia's shoulder. "We did something good here tonight. We helped them." Emily, ever the skeptic, still seemed to grapple with the reality of their experience. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but I felt something in there. When those spirits left, it was real." Zoe, whose bravery had been crucial to their success, smiled softly. "It was more than real. It was right. We set them free." Their conversation was interrupted by the chirping of their cell phones, signaling missed calls and messages from worried parents and friends. The reality of their normal lives began to creep back in, grounding them once more in the world they had temporarily left behind. "Guess we better explain where we've been all night," Jake said with a chuckle, pulling out his phone to call his mom. As they made their way back to town, the events at the chapel became a shared secret, a bond that would tie them together forever. But with the light of day, the weight of their experience began to sink in. They had encountered the supernatural, changed the course of restless spirits, and faced their own fears. It wasn't something they could easily share with others, nor was it a burden they could easily shed. Over the next few days, the group found themselves drawn together, spending more time with each other than usual, as if being apart made the reality of their experience too stark, too cold. They met at their favorite hangout, a small diner on the outskirts of Eldritch Hollow, where over cups of coffee and shared fries, they discussed what had happened. "We should go back," Zoe suggested one afternoon, her expression serious. "Not inside, just to the edge, to see it in the daylight, make sure everything is still." "Okay." The group agreed, curiosity mingling with a sense of responsibility. When they returned to the chapel a few days later, under the clear blue sky of a crisp autumn day, they found it serene and undisturbed, as if the chapel itself was taking a long, peaceful breath after centuries of holding in pain. "It looks just like any old building now," Emily observed, her tone mixed with reverence and a trace of residual fear. "Looks can be deceiving," Lucas murmured, his eyes scanning the architecture, always the historian. As they stood there, a sense of closure enveloping them, a figure approached from the direction of the town. It was Mr. Hawthorne, the town historian and librarian, his approach slow and measured. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice gentle, his eyes keen. "I heard about what happened. The whole town feels different, lighter somehow." "You knew about the spirits?" Jake asked, surprise evident in his tone. Mr. Hawthorne nodded. "Some of us have always known, or suspected. We could feel the heaviness, the sorrow, but we never had the courage to face it, to help them. But you did." The teenagers listened, a mix of pride and awe filling them as they realized the extent of their impact. "I believe you've all learned something very important," Mr. Hawthorne continued, "about the world and about yourselves. Such knowledge is a powerful thing. Guard it well, and remember the courage it took to face the unknown." As Mr. Hawthorne walked away, leaving them with his cryptic yet wise words, the group shared a look of mutual understanding and respect. They'd gone in search of ghosts, and found more than they bargained for. They found purpose, bravery, and the truth that some legacies must be confronted and resolved, no matter how deep the shadows in which they lie. Weeks had passed since the teenagers had freed the spirits of the Chapel of the Silent Sisters.
The town of Eldritch Hollow had returned to its sleepy normalcy, or so it seemed. But beneath the calm, a darker truth simmered, a remnant of evil not fully cleansed from the chapel's ancient walls. It began one crisp autumn evening as the group met again at their favorite diner. They laughed and shared stories, but Zoe noticed a subtle shift in the air, a cold, prickling sensation that made her uneasy. As they left the diner, the streetlights flickered ominously, casting long shadows on the pavement. "Did you guys feel that?" Zoe asked, her voice low as they walked down the dimly lit street. "Feel what?" Mia responded. But before Zoe could reply, a chilling scream pierced the night. It came from the direction of the chapel. Without thinking, the group sprinted towards the chapel, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. The closer they got, the more intense the feeling of dread became. The chapel, which had seemed peaceful just days before, now emanated a dark, malevolent energy. As they reached the chapel grounds, they were not met with silence, but with whispers that swirled around them like mist. "Leave. This is not your place." The voices hissed, barely audible yet clearly menacing. Ignoring the warnings, they pushed forward, entering the chapel. The door slammed shut behind them with a thunderous bang, plunging them into darkness. Their flashlights flickered to life, casting eerie beams across the chapel's interior, which now seemed to morph and twist unnaturally. "Something's wrong," Emily said, her voice trembling. "This isn't like last time." They moved deeper into the chapel, the air growing colder with each step. Then, without warning, shadowy figures emerged from the walls, their forms vague and menacing. The group tried to run, but the figures were faster, more aggressive than any spirits they had encountered before. Lucas was the first to fall, his scream cut short as a shadow enveloped him, dragging him into the darkness. Panic erupted as Mia and Jake tried to fight off the assaulting shadows with their flashlights, but it was futile. One by one, they were picked off. Mia was swept away, her cries echoing off the stone walls, while Jake was pinned against a pillar, a shadowy hand closing around his throat. Emily and Zoe, now the only ones left, clung to each other, their flashlights their only defense. Emily's light flickered and died, and in a moment of utter terror she was gone, pulled away by unseen hands into the abyss. Zoe stood alone, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her flashlight beam trembling as she aimed it around her. "This is not your place," the voice hissed again, louder now, a malevolent whisper that seemed to come from the chapel itself. Realizing she might not escape, Zoe's mind raced. She remembered the crucifix of shadows, now seemingly a beacon that had attracted these darker spirits, not just freed the benign ones. Her only chance was to remove it from the chapel, to break the cycle of darkness it had perpetuated. With a burst of desperate courage, Zoe dashed towards the altar, dodging shadows that lunged at her. She grabbed the crucifix, feeling an immediate chill pass through her body, a dark energy pulsing from the artifact. Without hesitating, she ran back to the chapel's entrance, shadows clawing at her heels. She reached the door, threw it open, and with all her might, hurled the crucifix into the daylight. As soon as the artifact crossed the threshold, a scream of rage erupted from the chapel, and the shadows retreated, as if burned by the light. Zoe collapsed outside, the morning sun warming her chilled skin, her breaths heavy with exhaustion and relief. She was alone, the last one standing, surrounded by silence and the aftermath of a nightmare. As she lay there, the weight of her survival pressing down on her, she knew Eldritch Hollow would never be the same. She had survived, but at a cost that would haunt her forever. The chapel remained, a brooding monument to unseen horrors, a warning to those who dared to uncover the secrets that should have remained hidden